The silence in the house that night wasn't normal. It wasn't peace. It was punishment. It pressed against the walls, heavy and suffocating, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to break. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, and even that felt too loud. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing through the hall, unsteady, uneven. I pushed open the kitchen door. The light flickered once, a stuttering glow that made the note on the table gleam white against the wooden surface. It was the only thing in the room that looked alive. At first, I didn't move. I just stared at it. I think part of me already knew what it was. A wife always knows when her marriage has died, the way you can smell rain before it falls. When I finally picked it up, my fingers shook. Mara. I can't say this to your face. I've met someone else. The kids are with me, they're safe. The divorce papers are below. Eli. My chest caved in. The words blurred as I read them again, slower this time, as if they'd change if I looked long enough. My husband, my partner for more than a decade, was gone. He'd taken my children and left behind a letter like it was an errand list. The papers beneath the note made it real. He'd signed them already. Cold ink, perfect penmanship. He'd even highlighted where I was supposed to sign, polite, efficient, heartless. But the last page, that one took my breath away. Consent for adoption. He wanted him, his new lover, to adopt my children. I didn't even need to read the name. I knew. Derek Caldwell. A man Eli had once called a friend. A man who owned the construction firm Eli worked for. A man who had smiled at me across dinner tables, shaking my hand like he wasn't already taking everything that mattered to me. I sat down hard on the nearest chair. My pulse was so loud it drowned out the clock. I could feel my face burn as if someone had slapped me. The silence turned from heavy to hostile. The wall seemed to lean in, whispering that I was alone now. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. I grabbed my phone. He answered after 3 rings, his voice calm, too calm. Hello? To hell with hello, Eli, I hissed. Where are my children? Mara. Don't you Mara me. You think you can vanish with my kids and leave a note like that? I didn't vanish, he said, his tone steady, like he'd rehearsed it. They're fine. They're with me and Derek. We'll figure things out. We? I laughed bitterly. You mean you and him? Silence. I could picture him standing there, probably somewhere in that sleek new house Derek owned, marble floors, perfect lighting, expensive gilt. You planned this, I said. Didn't you? All those late nights, the business trips, the client dinners. You were already with him. Mara, please don't make this harder. Harder? I snapped. You destroyed our family. Don't you dare tell me what's hard. I hung up before he could say another word. The phone hit the counter with a dull thud. My breath came out in shudders. I didn't cry, not yet. Crying felt too small for what I felt. No, what I felt was fire. That night I couldn't cook, couldn't think, couldn't sit still. I left the house and drove aimlessly through town. The lights blurred past like streaks of accusation. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, but I kept going until I found myself parked outside a dive bar I hadn't been to in years. Inside, the air smelled of whiskey and smoke. I took a seat near the back, ordered a bourbon I didn't really want, and stared at my reflection in the bottle. I barely recognized the woman looking back, hollow eyes, messy hair, a ghost in her own skin. Rough night? A voice asked. I looked up. It was Tessa, an old friend from high school, someone I hadn't seen in ages. She looked surprised, maybe even worried. You look like hell, she said bluntly, sliding onto the stool beside me. Thanks. My husband just left me for someone richer. Damn, she muttered. Who's the lucky guy? Derek Caldwell. Her expression changed instantly. Wait, Caldwell Construction Derek? That's the one. Everyone knows him, she said, lowering her voice. He's charming when he wants something. Dangerous when he doesn't get it. Yeah, I said, taking another drink. Guess I learned that the hard way. Tessa hesitated before asking, "What are you going to do?" I stared into the glass for a long moment. "I don't know yet," I said finally. "But I'm not going to disappear." When I got home, the house felt even emptier than before. But something had changed. The note was still there, the papers still waiting, but I wasn't trembling anymore. I was thinking. Planning. They thought they could rewrite my life, take my children, and leave me in the ruins. They had no idea who I was without them. The next morning, I woke up on the kitchen floor. The bottle of bourbon was tipped over near my hand, the note still lying beside me like a corpse I hadn't buried yet. For a long time I just stared at the ceiling fan spinning above me, the sound of its whirring blades drowning out the noise in my head. The world outside carried on, cars passing, birds chirping, the same town that had watched me bake bread, raise kids, and smile through the monotony of a life I thought was safe. Now it all looked unreal. Like a movie set after the camera stopped rolling. I dragged myself up, poured the remaining bourbon down the sink, and opened the divorce papers again. My name, his name, cold legal text between us. But one page had something I hadn't noticed before, a post-it note in Derek Caldwell's handwriting. "Once this is signed, we can move forward. D." I tore it off so hard the corner of the page ripped. Then I burned the note in the sink. Later that afternoon, I drove to my lawyer's office downtown. Her name was Dana Cole, a sharp-eyed woman with a reputation for being both ruthless and precise. I'd never needed her before. Now, I needed her more than ever. She read the documents silently, then set them down and looked at me. "Are you sure you want to fight this, Mara? He's offering you the house, full financial settlement." "I don't care about the money," I interrupted. "He wants me to sign away my children." Dana nodded slowly. "Then we fight." She leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. "Caldwell's name is on a lot of these financial documents." "That's unusual." "He's either very confident or very stupid." "Probably both," I said. "They deserve each other." Dana smirked. "Maybe. But confidence leaves fingerprints, and stupidity leaves paper trails. I'll look into him." That was the first spark of hope I'd felt since that night. A few days later, while sorting through old photos to distract myself, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but local. I answered anyway. "Mara Ellison?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes. This is Detective Rowan from City Police. We're investigating a complaint regarding property damage at Caldwell Development. Your name was listed on a contact sheet for employees." "I'm not an employee," I said. "Not anymore. Can you come in for a few questions anyway?" "Routine stuff." Something in her tone didn't sound routine. When I arrived at the station, the detective's expression was polite but guarded. She showed me a folder of documents, invoices, project permits, contracts. My name appeared on one of them, forged. "Your husband," she said carefully, "used your signature to authorize transfer of a construction permit worth over $200,000. My stomach turned. "What?" "It's not legally binding now that it's flagged as fraud," Rowan continued, "but it's possible he and Caldwell used it to secure a loan. If that's true, you might be on record as co-signer." The room tilted. He hadn't just broken my heart. He'd tied my name to his crimes. I walked out of the precinct in a daze, clutching the copy she'd given me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Outside, the sky had darkened, heavy clouds gathering above the skyline like bruises. It felt right. It matched the way my chest felt, swollen, aching, ready to burst. That evening, I drove to the construction yard where Caldwell's office was. It was late, the sun barely holding on behind the trees. His office lights were still on, faint through the glass windows. I parked far enough away not to be seen. Through the blinds, I saw them. Eli and Derek. Eli's face was pale, worried. Derek looked angry, the kind of anger that hides fear. He was waving papers, shouting. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read body language. They weren't in love. They were in trouble. For a split second, Eli turned toward the window. I ducked. My heart slammed against my ribs. When I looked again, Derek was gone. Eli was pacing, running his hands through his hair. He looked terrified. And somehow, that scared me more than his betrayal. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the house felt like a footstep. Every shadow felt like it might move if I blinked. By morning, I'd made up my mind. If Derek Caldwell thought he could erase me, he was about to learn the cost of underestimating someone who's lost everything. But before I could act, the storm came for me first. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of breaking glass. My heart froze. I sat up slowly, listening. The house was dark except for the faint orange glow from the street light outside. Then I heard it again, footsteps on the tile. I reached for the baseball bat I kept by the bed. My breath came out shallow as I crept down the hallway, past the framed photos of my children that I couldn't take down even after they'd been gone for months. In the kitchen, the window was shattered. The curtains blew inward with the wind. And on the table, the same table where Eli's note had been, was something new. A single sheet of paper. Typed. Sign the papers, Mara. Stop digging. This is your last warning. There was no signature. But I didn't need one. The letter smelled faintly of his cologne. Derek Caldwell's scent, expensive, sharp, unforgettable. I looked out through the broken glass. The street was empty. But I could feel someone watching. That's when the thunder cracked, loud enough to shake the windows. Rain poured down, cold and heavy. The storm had arrived. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It came down in waves, turning the streets into veins of silver and mud. The kind of storm that drowns out everything, even your thoughts. I stayed inside, jumping at every noise, every shadow that brushed past the windows. My mind kept replaying that message over and over. Stop digging. This is your last warning. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. By the 4th morning, the clouds broke, thin streaks of sunlight cutting through the wet air. I opened the front door for the first time in days, my body tense, half expecting someone to be waiting. Instead, there was a moving van next door. A woman stood beside it, hair pulled into a messy bun, rain-soaked boxes stacked at her feet. She looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that comes from more than just heavy lifting. I watched for a minute before calling out. You moving in or moving out? She jumped a little, then smiled weakly. Moving in, hopefully. Though at this rate, I might drown before I unpack. I walked over. You picked a hell of a week. Tell me about it, she laughed softly, shifting the box in her arms. I'm Nina. Mara. When she looked up at me, I noticed her eyes first, pale gray, tired but kind. Something in them made me feel oddly calm, like the air around her was softer somehow. Let me help, I said, taking the box from her before she could argue. That was the first time in months I'd done something that felt normal, human. We carried boxes, talked about nothing, and laughed about the absurdity of rain on moving day. By sunset, most of her things were inside, and my muscles ached in a way that felt good. Tangible. Real. Thank you, Nina said, brushing damp hair from her face. I owe you dinner. I smiled faintly. You don't owe me anything. But if you make coffee that's stronger than what I've been drinking, I might show up uninvited. Deal. It wasn't a big moment. It wasn't cinematic or loud. But that evening, I felt the faintest flicker of something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Over the next few weeks, Nina and I found a rhythm. Morning waves across the fence. Evening tea. Casual conversations that somehow always turn deep, about loss, fear, and how people can disappear without dying. One night, after too many glasses of wine, she told me about her husband. His name had been Ben. A soldier. Died suddenly from a brain clot 6 months before she moved here. I thought grief would fade, she said quietly, tracing the rim of her glass. But it doesn't. It just changes its shape. I understood that more than I could say. Mine too, I whispered. Your husband? Left me. For someone else. She flinched like she'd been hit. I'm sorry. Don't be. He didn't just leave, he took my kids. Her hand brushed mine on the table, soft, hesitant, grounding. You'll get them back, she said. People like that always destroy themselves. Her words lingered long after she left. That night, I dreamed of fire. Of a house collapsing in on itself, walls glowing orange while a man's voice whispered, "You should have stayed quiet." I woke to the sound of a car door slamming outside. When I peered through the blinds, I saw a black SUV idling in front of Nina's house. Tinted windows. Engine running. No one got out. It stayed there for nearly 10 minutes before pulling away. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. Just a delivery. A neighbor. Anything normal. But when I went out later to check the mail, I found a wet envelope tucked under my doormat. No stamp, no address. Inside was a single photo. A blurry shot of Nina and me unloading boxes the day she moved in. On the back, scrawled in marker. You don't know who she really is. My stomach dropped. I looked up at Nina's house. Curtains drawn. No movement. I should have gone inside. Called someone. Ignored it. But curiosity has always been my fatal flaw. I walked next door and knocked. After a few moments, Nina opened the door. Her smile flickered when she saw my face. Mara? What's wrong? I held out the photo. Do you know anything about this? She stared at it for a long time, her lips tightening. Then she looked up, eyes shining in the dim light. You need to come inside. The air in her house smelled faintly of paint and lavender. She locked the door behind us, then pulled the curtains shut. Her hands were trembling. That SUV you saw, she said quietly, it wasn't the first time. What do you mean? I've seen it outside my work. At the grocery store. Even parked behind me at lights. Always the same car. A chill crawled up my spine. Who do you think it is? Her eyes filled with something between fear and shame. My husband wasn't just a soldier. He worked for someone, a private contractor. After he died, they came to me asking for something. I told them I didn't know what they meant. A week later, I started seeing that car. I stared at her, heart pounding. And now they're watching you again? She nodded. Or maybe, watching us. For a long time, we just sat there, the rain beginning again outside. The shadows on the walls looked like people standing too still. Finally, I asked, what did your husband have that they want? Her eyes met mine. A ledger. Names, accounts, transfers. Things people would kill to keep secret. The words hung in the air like smoke. And then she added, almost a whisper, and I think Derek Caldwell's name was in it. Everything went cold inside me. My voice barely worked when I said, "You're sure?" I found a note in Ben's files after he died, she said. It said, if anything happens to me, find Mara Ellison. She'll know what to do. I froze. The room spun. How the hell would your husband know me? I don't know, she whispered. But I think your ex-husband knew him. The clock ticked between us. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled again, distant, warning. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about survival. By the time I stepped out of Nina's house that night, my world had tilted again. The rain had stopped, leaving the street slick and glistening beneath the streetlights. The reflection of her house shimmered in the puddles, calm, quiet, innocent. But behind those windows sat a truth that was anything but. A ledger. A dead soldier. And a name I thought I'd buried in the ashes of my old life, Derek Caldwell. Sleep was impossible. Every sound outside felt like a warning. At 2 a.m., I found myself sitting by the window, the bat still by my side, staring at the driveway where the SUV had been. My pulse refused to slow. If Ben, Nina's late husband, had been tracking something connected to Derek, that meant Eli hadn't just left me for love. He'd walked straight into a web. And maybe I was the loose end they hadn't tied up. The next morning, I went straight to Dana Cole's office, the lawyer who'd been helping me with the divorce. She looked surprised to see me so early, still in yesterday's clothes. "Mara," she said, setting down her coffee. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't. I need you to pull everything you can on Derek Caldwell. Every business, every property, every alias. There's something." She raised a brow. "Slow down. What happened?" I hesitated. How could I even explain it? A secret ledger, shadow cars, a dead soldier who knew my name? It sounded like paranoia. But Dana had always been sharp. So I told her everything, or almost everything. When I mentioned Derek's name in connection with government contracts, she went still. "Jesus," she muttered. "You might be onto something." "What do you mean?" She turned her computer around and showed me a file. Caldwell Development isn't just construction. They're a shell company for a logistics network that's received multiple high-value government payments over the past 3 years. But the trail goes cold after the money's moved. Someone's laundering it. Through his company? Through dozens of companies that don't technically exist. My throat tightened. Eli worked for him. Signed documents. My signature was forged on one. Dana's expression darkened. "Then you're already in the paperwork. If Caldwell goes down, you go with him, unless we can prove coercion or forgery." I sank into the chair. "And if I can't?" "Then you'll need proof. Something that ties all this to him, and clears your name." The ledger. If what Nina said was true, that book might be the only thing that could save me. That evening, I went next door. Nina answered before I could even knock. "You couldn't stop thinking about it either," she said. "No," I admitted. "We need to find that ledger." She bit her lip. "It's not here." I checked everything, boxes, drawers, Ben's laptop. Nothing. Where would he keep something like that? She hesitated. There was a storage unit. Ben used to say it was for tools, but, after he died, I never went. We drove there after dark, headlights slicing through the mist. The storage facility was on the edge of town, surrounded by rusted fences and old trees that looked like they'd been watching secrets for decades. Nina's hand shook as she unlocked the gate. "Unit 46, she whispered. The lock on the door was broken, snapped clean. My stomach twisted. Someone had already been here. Inside, the air was stale with dust and oil. Boxes were scattered across the floor, papers half-burned, a chair knocked over. Whoever had come wasn't looking, they were erasing. Then I saw it, a metal lockbox on the ground, half open. Inside were charred fragments of paper. But one corner of a page had survived. I picked it up gently. Numbers. Bank codes. And at the top, written in smudged ink. Caldwell. 7A transfer confirmed. Funds secured offshore. I looked up at Nina. This was real. Before she could answer, headlights flashed across the wall. A car had pulled up outside. Nina's eyes went wide. They found us. I grabbed her arm and pulled her behind a stack of crates just as the metal door creaked open. 2 men stepped inside, dark coats, flashlights. Not police. Too quiet. Too careful. I pressed a finger to my lips. The beam of a flashlight passed inches from our faces, landing on the open lockbox. One of the men swore under his breath. She got it. Caldwell's gonna lose his mind. They turned, scanning the room again. For a second, I thought they'd found us. Then something outside made them pause, a distant siren. The taller one muttered, "Let's move. We'll check her house next." They left as quietly as they came. The sound of their engine faded into the night. Nina and I stayed frozen until the silence returned. Back at my place, the light stayed off. I locked every door and closed every curtain. "They know who we are now," I whispered. "You heard him, they'll come here next." Nina sat on the couch, clutching the burnt fragment like it was a lifeline. "Then we have to go public. If the police know." "No," I cut in. "You saw how they forged my name. If this is tied to money laundering or defense contracts, half the department could be on his payroll." She met my eyes. "Then what do we do?" I didn't have an answer yet. But I knew this much: Derek Caldwell wasn't just trying to silence me. He was cleaning up everything, anyone who could connect him to the money. And now, Nina and I were at the top of that list. 2 days later, I went back to Dana's office to show her the burned fragment. But when I arrived, the door was locked, the blinds drawn. Her assistant was standing outside, pale as chalk. "What's going on?" I asked. Her voice shook. "Dana's dead. Car accident. Early this morning." The world tilted. "What?" "They said she lost control on the highway. But the police were here earlier asking about you." "About me?" The assistant nodded slowly. "They said your name came up in her files." Something cold slid through my chest. This wasn't coincidence. Dana had found something, and they'd silenced her for it. That night, I packed a bag. Nina was already waiting by her car, her face pale but determined. "We can't stay," she said simply. "If they think we have the ledger, they'll keep coming." I looked back at my house, the only home I'd ever known. The window light flickered once in the darkness, like the house was saying goodbye. "Where are we going?" I asked. Nina's hand tightened on the steering wheel. "Somewhere they can't find us. My husband used to say, if things ever got bad, go where the storm began." "What does that mean?" She looked at me, eyes reflecting the passing streetlights. "It means his base. The place he worked before everything went wrong. Blackridge." I frowned. "That's in the mountains." "It's abandoned." "Exactly," she said. "That's where the truth is." As we drove into the night, the highway stretched ahead, endless, black, silent. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, harder. Behind us, somewhere in the distance, a pair of headlights followed for a while. Then disappeared. For the first time in months, I wasn't sure if I was running from the past, or straight into it. The mountain roads were empty. Our headlights cut through the mist, carving tunnels of light into the darkness. The sign for Blackridge Research Facility, restricted access, was half buried in weeds, the paint cracked and faded. Nina slowed the car. "This is it," she said quietly. The facility loomed ahead like a skeleton of concrete and glass. The gates hung open, rusted, as though someone, or something, had forced them long ago. The world was silent except for the wind whispering through broken windows. We stepped out, flashlights in hand. The air smelled like rain and old metal. "This place was decommissioned years ago," Nina said. "Ben used to come here before his deployment. He said it was part of a logistics project, but he never talked about what kind." I scanned the entrance. "And you think the ledger's here?" She hesitated, then pointed. "There. The sub-basement. That's where he used to work." The elevator was dead, so we took the stairs, the beam of my flashlight dancing across peeling paint and rusted rails. Every footstep echoed down the concrete stairwell, swallowed by the dark. When we reached the bottom, the air grew colder. A single metal door stood at the end of the corridor, a faded 7A stenciled on it in white paint. The same number from the burned fragment. My pulse spiked. Nina stepped forward, but I caught her arm. Wait. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. Then I pushed it open. Inside was a small office, overturned chairs, cracked monitors, paper scattered like confetti after a disaster. But in the center of the desk sat a single object untouched by dust. A black notebook. The ledger. I crossed the room slowly, my hand trembling as I reached for it. The cover was rough, leather-bound, scarred. Inside were rows of handwritten entries, names, accounts, transfer codes. I turned a page and froze. Eli Ellison. My ex-husband's name, written beside an offshore account number. The amount listed was obscene. I felt my knees weaken. Nina's voice was small behind me. He was in on it. I turned the page again, and there it was. A note in the margin, written in the same hand as the one I'd seen on the burned fragment. Funds moved under Caldwell directive. Cover-up active. Compromised. It hit me like a punch. Eli hadn't just been involved, he'd been the fall guy. And whatever he'd done for Derek, it had cost him his life. Before I could speak, a floorboard creaked. We spun around. Derek Caldwell stood in the doorway, a gun hanging loosely at his side. His smile was thin and exhausted. You really should have stopped digging, Mara. My mouth went dry. You killed him. He stepped closer, the gun never wavering. Eli? No. Eli killed himself the moment he thought he could outsmart me. He started talking to Ben, your little soldier friend. Said he wanted out. He was going to hand over files, proof of where the money went. Nina's voice trembled. Ben died of a clot. Derek's smile widened. Did he? The air went still. I stepped in front of her. You're not getting this ledger. Oh, I think I am, he said softly. You've seen too much. The police will find this place burned to the ground, your car at the gate, two poor women who couldn't let the past go. My eyes darted around the room. There was no cover, no escape. Just shadows and metal and him. Then Nina's voice cut through the silence, low and fierce. You're forgetting one thing. Derek turned slightly. And what's that? The storm has already started. Before I could ask what she meant, lightning flashed through the shattered window, a brilliant burst that filled the room with white light, and Nina dove for the desk. She grabbed the ledger and threw it toward me. Derek fired. The shot tore through the air, deafening. Nina collapsed against the desk, blood spreading fast across her side. I screamed, ducking behind a cabinet, clutching the book to my chest. My ears rang. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the metallic tang of blood. Derek moved slowly toward me, boots echoing on the concrete. You can't hide, Mara. He reached the desk, stepping over Nina's motionless body. He was so close I could hear his breathing, steady, cruel. Then I saw it, the leaking pipe near the wall, sparks hissing from a damaged wire beside it. Old electrical lines. Corroded, but alive. I crawled silently along the floor, dragging a metal chair leg with me. When he turned toward the sound, I jammed the leg between the wire and the pipe. The world exploded in white fire. The shockwave threw me backward. For a second, there was only sound, a roar like thunder, then nothing. When I opened my eyes, smoke filled the room. The walls glowed orange. Derek lay near the doorway, unmoving, his gun still clutched in his hand. The facility was burning. I crawled toward Nina, coughing, pulling her up. Her face was pale, her breath shallow. Come on, I whispered. We're getting out. Together, we staggered up the stairs, flames licking the walls behind us. Every step was a war. The heat bit into my skin, my lungs raw from smoke. But I didn't stop until the cold air hit my face. We collapsed on the gravel outside as the building behind us groaned and caved in on itself, sparks shooting into the storm-dark sky. The fire settled all debts. Days later, I stood by a hospital window, my arm wrapped in bandages. Nina was alive, barely, recovering down the hall. The police had ruled the explosion an accident, though I knew better. The ledger was gone, burned with the building. But before the flames reached it, I'd torn out one page, the one with Eli's name. It sat folded in my hand, edges blackened, ink still visible. That page was enough. Enough to clear my name. Enough to prove Eli hadn't been a monster, just a man trapped by one. I looked out over the sunrise breaking through the fog, golden and new. For the first time in years, the silence didn't scare me. It felt earned. I thought of Derek's words, of Eli's final note, of every lie that had brought me here. And I whispered to no one. Maybe you were right, Eli. The fire settles all debts. 6 months later. Nina and I opened a bakery in a quiet coastal town, far from the noise of the city. People came for the bread, stayed for the warmth. Some nights, when the wind howled and the sea hissed against the rocks, I'd think of the flames rising behind us that night, how something had ended and something else had begun. I'd lost everything once. Now, I was free. And in the ashes, I'd found something Derek Caldwell would never understand. Peace. If you love stories like this, show your love by clicking the subscribe button, like, share and comment. Also let's know where you are watching from. Thank you and see you in the next story.